Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
As agencies navigate hybrid work, evolving threats, and return to the office mandates, physical security is no longer just about locks and badges. It's about real-time data and rethinking who gets in and why. Here to share how access control is becoming mission critical and what agencies need to do now to stay secure is the Director of Compliance and Security at Sign-In Solutions, Jason Mordeno. Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me here also.
You've written about a new front line of government security. Let's kind of dig into that. What are some of the biggest challenges that government facilities face today when it comes to physical security?
I can begin with that. I think it's more from a high-level bird's eye view that it's fair to say that physical access used to be treated as something operational. You have a check-in desk, maybe a visitor log, but it doesn't hold true anymore in this day and age and world. What we can say is agencies, contractors, or companies, they're recognizing that physical access is real and an evolving threat, especially with the advent of AI being here, enabling things like deepfakes, potential synthetic identity creation, and advanced impersonation attempts. So the risk isn't even cyber anymore. It's what we would call cyber physical. It can be someone walking with forged credentials, somebody may be accessing sensitive space that who shouldn't be, right? They check out as who they are on paper, but they're not fully vetted. And it's exactly why physical security, specifically visitor access, is going to become part of what I would call a broader national security conversation. So it's not even just about the lobby. It's about controlling access within secured zones within your offices and facilities where the stakes could be higher and the movement needs to be intentional, right? For example, if I'm accessing a space, perhaps I'm only allowed floor 1, but floor 2 should be more for other individuals who have finite access. In high security government environments, of course, it's best to operate with a mindset that, in the assumption that not all visitors are going to be equal and not all areas should be accessible by default. It's not a shopping mall per se where you could just walk in, go to where you are. You are going to be allowed only to certain functions and areas, and that's how it should be. So one of the concepts in cybersecurity or even in privacy is the concept of least privilege. It's very familiar. It just means that giving access to what's absolutely necessary and nothing more. If you apply that approach, you're going to have a very secure approach to your visits, your offices and whatnot. And then just drawing on top of that, when I mentioned the advent of AI, is artificial intelligence and the technology that comes with it is forcing us to reframe how we think of visitor management. So at first, we would likely think of, say, I have a spreadsheet, I have an isolated sheet log somewhere. Those are what we call static scheduling tools. Now, at a certain point, we are going to have to move to dynamic risk-aware controls. For example, within your data set, can you identify an unexpected visitor pattern? Or can you verify someone's identity based on multiple trusted signals, right? Another way you could look at it is, can you prevent access not just at the front door, but across internal zones? That data cannot be derived in an isolated, siloed manner. You need more actionable items, right? You need to see whether there's a pattern, there's a recognition, because I'm going to bring it back in as I move along. Security at a physical layer, meaning at the front, is something to be thought about. You probably watch movies where it seems like, the heroes or villains always somehow gets through the perimeter. They always somehow gets through. And it's interesting because you would think with the millions of dollars poured into physical security that they can't. But I'm bringing that example because we have to look at it that way, that the easiest access to perhaps a facility or a location is the front door. And that front door can involve social engineering, and now it involves AI-driven insights. And we also have to push back with our own AI-driven insights to inform our physical security in real time. So another one I could even just go through is, let's say if a contractor repeatedly appears at an unexpected time or location, that should trigger a review, not be found after the fact. Because the nature of threats has changed, and also we must also change how we look at the landscape.
I'm speaking with Jason Mordeno. He's the Director of Compliance and Security at Sign-In Solutions. Jason, the examples you just gave hit me straight on. When I think of physical security, I'm usually thinking of somebody walking through a front door with a badge. And your suggestions about cyber physical and other things that we need to check are really a fresh reminder. But physical security is way more than the front door, as you've said. We have massive government installations. We don't have people all over there. Drones are a big threat now for intelligence, cyber tools. How do you go beyond the person at the front gate to think about what's happening all around the perimeters of highly secure government facilities?
Leveraging our company specializes in visitor management, so I would leverage some of our know-how in answering that. If you look at it, most places have their own unique bespoke system, but you can't exactly derive the necessary data analytics to address those types of threats, right? One thing is leveraging other types of resources called third-party integrations. So an example from what we do that could be thought of as a process in yours would be, how are you integrating data for ID verification? So let's say someone's at the front door or somebody's entering a specific sensitive office space. It's not enough to vet who they are. You must also vet their background, because their background is going to employ how they're accessing that space, right? Maybe they're not even meant to. And that type of data needs to flow in what we would call a pre-screening workflow that triggers specific logical paths. Logical paths meaning if Jason is allowed the front door, is also allowed at, say, the meeting room on floor 5, and is floor 5 only for a finite amount of access, not 24/7, right? And these real-time insights, risk insights, is going to flag visit anomalies, like unscheduled re-entry attempts or odd location patterns. It could be something as innocent as just delivering coffee, but that's something innocent as delivering coffee is what you would see in the movies, how every single one, heroes or villains, somehow bypass security, right? But these are the insights that we need, specifically when we're in a point in time that these types of visits, or even the data that is hidden, again, protected within those facilities, need to be protected further. It's almost to say that checking your ID is not enough. We need to understand why you're there, and that why you're there needs to be understood within the split second you attempt to enter the space, right? And that's what forward-looking agencies should be doing. Now, that may seem like a lot, and it may seem like, wow, but it's not. It's you'd still think of what I would call Southern hospitality. You'd still look at it from, how do I still invite you to a place without compromising friction or causing a lot of headaches? Because at the end of the day, business still needs to run, a facility needs to run, and some of the sensitive know-hows and what to do, you don't want to also expose that to the individual accessing. So for example, if you scan an ID or we tag you against a location, it's a yes or no. But the data behind that, to whomever it is, the administrator, they're going to get a treasure trove of data based on a yes and a no. One of those that would feed in is specifically in sensitive federal campuses or contractor space, right? Some leading practice emerge that we also do, and we suggest, right, you just to even think of that perspective, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of perspective. Zone access controls could be one of them, meaning your role and risk level, not just time-based entry, need to be considered. Real-time approval flows that adapt based on the type of visit. So for example, if I'm expected to visit typical day hours, but for some reason, and it could be there was a party at work, we decided to come back to the office Friday night. That also needs to be adapted towards and perhaps cause another screening next week as to why an office was accessed afterwards. Even if there's no confidential data within that space, that still needs to be understood. A lot of the bypasses occur, again, when it appears innocent. A third thing I can impart is automated documentation of visitor activity, right? Is it tied to required acknowledgments, your classifications, your policy briefings? It can even go as far as this individual can only access space with a specific set of sensitive data, and that data, you could even debrief them ahead of time. But those restrictions can come at the same time. And then the last thing I can impart on that is, critically, we need to shift away from paper-based records. You could argue they are safe because they're paper, but they're not digitally auditable. You cannot derive analytics from there. And there are still siloed facilities that use paper-based records that cannot derive insights out of. So in a way, we still have to think of visiting a location or being in a location with hospitality, and the surveillance needs to be, I would call, silent. So at the end of the day, it's also about being accountable to your own internal policies and being able to demonstrate security controls where needed.
We're going through a big change in the federal workforce right now. There's a lot of people who don't work here anymore. We might have lost some institutional memory. And there are a lot of people who are still getting used to coming back to the office for work. In the challenging and evolving security environment that you're describing, how do we get managers and employees to kind of get their heads in the game about these new threats? What should they be thinking of as they're coming into work every day?
If I was in that spot where I'm dealing with, facility changes that are unprecedented, the first thing I need to understand for is who is allowed in the office and how do I gain access to that, and where would I gain the verification and real time risk assessment? Because some individuals coming back are supposed to come back, maybe it's their last 2 weeks, but there are also new individuals that are being onboarded. But at the same time, there may be contractors. How would you manage all of that? So if you don't have actionable insights, you could look at external tools out there. But the verification of these individuals is also what I would call a threat, because there are actors out there who don't think too kindly of the US that could leverage this as an opportunity for themselves. And in my example of heroes and villains in movies, that is the exact type of chaos that breeds threat exposures, gaps in a secure facility. I'll give another example. You could have a secured, 50-floor office space building, but the weakness may not be, as they show in movies, like a special window and so on. The weakness could just be the bypass of the security functions that you have, meaning the front door, right? But how would you, as manager, say managing thousands of employees, there's been unprecedented changes, manage that? You're going to have the data at your fingertips. You're going to have alerts. You're going to have insights right at the front of your screen. Otherwise, how would you be able to catch up, right? Another point of view is that the individual or the manager should still be the pilot, right? So security also can't come at the cost of operational flow. So however you're molding your processes, seamless experience still matters, meaning you at the driver's seat, you're the pilot, you're in charge on how that experience flows and how it's secure. It still has to be efficient and professional, right? So some of the things we're seeing, right, based on hospitality principles, because you still have to let them in, still be kind to them. You're going to have to look at, say, pre-registration. You register in advance. There's digital wayfinding. So perhaps, within this space, your location's being tagged. There's also advanced document routing. Let's say I let you enter a facility and you're sitting in an office room. Certain documents are in advance going to be allowed to you. So it reduces on-site friction, because that on-site friction you can think of as another point of gap that could be taken advantage of, right? And this matters more, especially we're in a hybrid workforce setting. Some of us are remote, some have hybrid. Roles change and familiarity is low. You may not expect a new coworker, or you may expect the old ones who's been there for a bit. But again, tones change, things change. You need to be able to accommodate for those types of changes, and that needs to be at your fingertip. It's almost coming back that, well, it's just a visitor, right? Like, how would we manage that? It doesn't seem like it's the biggest threat, but that is the biggest threat in a facility. If you have a facility, how would you govern and manage the type of data? And as I mentioned to our company, like, again, we're Sign-In Solutions. We're a visitor management and compliance workflow. So for us, we sit with forward-thinking agencies and companies all the time who are leading the ship. So it's not even us innovating this, it's the facilities themselves, and we react with them. And our combined mutual reaction produces the innovation that we also have. So another thing you can think of is when you modernize physical access, is how would you manage that? Like I've described quite a bit of things, but can you scale it? Because that's the other factor that people usually think, well, if I scale it, it may come with budget, it may come with cost, it may seem too big for me. It isn't. Again, think of this as it's a matter of perspective. How do I align the security policies with the ever-changing times, and how to respond with today's more complex threat environment? The answer is fairly simple, meaning let's revisit our basics. Let's revisit how we could and what we couldn't, and what we have and we don't have, because that would reveal brainstorming questions for yourselves. How are you managing your visitor access, right? And sometimes visitor access isn't even on facilities. Perhaps you're headquartered, say, in Colorado, but you need to manage a site in New York. You're not even there, but you need to understand how that New York office is functioning, and if that New York office is functioning against your company's policies. That's an advantage you need to see from your headquarters, wherever that may be, so you can place an enforcement on policies and verify identities, and most importantly, demonstrate real-world security leadership.
I've been speaking with Jason Mordeno. He's the Director of Compliance and Security at Sign-In Solutions. Jason, thanks for helping us really understand the practicalities of this really complex environment. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.